Kitco Mining's special coverage of PDAC is brought to you by Gold Mining and Uranium Energy Corps.
Having seen off BHP to acquire Canada's Noront and its high-grade Eagle's Nest nickel, copper, platinum, and palladium project in Ontario, Wyloo Metals, a subsidiary of Tatarang, the private family business of Dr. Andrew Forrest, founder of Fortescue Metals Group, now renamed Ring of Fire Metals, has its sights set to become a world-class battery metals producer. To tell us more, I'm joined here today at the PDAC 2023 by Kristan Straub, CEO of Ring of Fire Metals. Welcome to Kitco, Kristan.
Thank you very much for the invite today, Paul.
Now, a bidding war with BHP in late 2021 ignited a lot of interest in the mining and metals space. You eventually won out with a $617 million Canadian bid. Why was it so important for the company to obtain Eagle's Nest?
Eagle's Nest represents one of the highest grade, largest nickel sulfide deposits in the world today. So it represented an attractive value proposition for other companies to come in. BHP was one that was having a look at it, and Wyloo had acquired that during that competition. So it was a bit of a competition as it went through and a couple of different iterations, but ultimately Wyloo is the successor in that, and we now have Wyloo as our owners and our investors and our backers for this new operation.
Okay, the Ring of Fire district is famous and has been for a number of decades. What is so special about Eagle's Nest, and what is so special about the nickel it contains?
So the deposit of Eagle's Nest is a relatively high-grade nickel copper sulfide along with PGE deposit. So we're looking at a nickel equivalent of about 3.6% nickel equivalent, so nickel plus copper, cobalt, PGEs at their respective ratios within the deposit. Now, the Ring of Fire itself represents a relatively unexplored area. So when the discovery was made in the region, it was a new discovery, and it started off a very large staking rush into the area, to which a number of other grounds were acquired, and there were some other deposits that were discovered along the way through that staking rush. But it represents one of Canada's newest regions for exploration and potential development.
Okay, the plan at Eagle's Nest was to build an underground mine with the capacity to produce between 150,000 and 250,000 tons per year of nickel-bearing concentrate for an initial 11-year mine life. Is that still the plan? How have the plans perhaps advanced or evolved since you've taken possession of the asset?
So the basic framework of that is still what's on the table today. I would say that some of the changes that we've looked at now with the change in market and the change in direction towards electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles is to understand, can we split our concentrate? Can we produce a nickel concentrate and a copper concentrate? Previously, we looked at producing a bulk concentrate and finding a home for that within a traditional smelting world. Today, we're starting to look at, can we split concentrates, and can we now look towards participating in building a battery metals plant here in Ontario?
Okay, thank you. It's certainly an interesting time in the nickel space with the energy transition, sustainable development, things like that. Class 1 nickel is really coming into its own, so to speak, compared to Class 2 nickel because of the various environmental advantages and technological advantages that it facilitates. Can you talk a little bit about what the difference between the two nickel products are?
Well, look, over the last decade, 15 years, we've seen tremendous growth in the production of nickel pig iron out of Indonesia, a product that is largely destined for stainless steel markets in China. We all know the history of how China built up that production, and it's now dominant within the world. There's a large move, as you mentioned, the destination of battery electric vehicles and Class 1 nickel. There's a large move to try and understand, can that be converted across to a Class 1 type product, or a product that could be ultimately end up in an electric vehicle. So in that process, the process of converting lateritic deposits through to a product that is able to be transitioned into a battery electric vehicle takes roughly 4 to 6 times the volume of energy that versus a traditional processing of a sulfide deposit. Now, one of the unique things about Ontario, electricity in Ontario is about 90% green access energy. So, meaning that it has no or very little carbon footprint to that energy. Contrast that with the carbon heavy energy that's used for nickel production in Indonesia, and we can easily understand why it is such a dramatic impact on the production of good quality nickel.
Well, thank you, Kristan. Now, that leads into one of the key attractions of Eagle's Nest, and that is its ability to be a net zero emissions mine. Can you sort of put a bit more detail into what a net zero emissions mine actually means or actually is?
You know, Paul, that's an excellent question. That really leads into the work that our Ring of Fire Metals team has been actively and diligently working on. I don't think it's foreign for the market now today and other producers to think about using battery-powered electric vehicles in underground mine applications. That's definitely something that we're planning into it, but something that is quite different from many of the other operations that I've seen in the past or been associated with in the past. We're looking at recycling 100% of our process water to be able to keep that internal to our operation. We're also looking at unique ways to be able to store tailings, the byproduct of production for nickel, back underground in a traditional paste fill backfill situation so that we do not have a tailings storage facility at site. We've heard a lot of the things that the communities and other groups have said about not wanting to have that potential environmental liability into the future. So we've worked creatively to be able to design something around that to ensure that doesn't happen.
I think that for me that illustrates the growing trend for sustainable mining development. You know, going beyond just taking the mineral or the metal out of the ground, but taking care of all the other things. So to really align with stakeholder concerns.
No, certainly. You know, we've taken a development approach to focus on a three-pillared strategy, focusing on people, focusing on the planet, and then focusing on the project. Why the people first? Because we understand that we have to engage, and we're committed to engaging with the First Nations community of our region and making meaningful growth with them to ensure that we have proper training, proper development, and proper advancement with them. We're also there to have development for Indigenous-led businesses to participate in our operation, and we've committed to our partners to over $100 million worth of contracts with Indigenous-owned businesses for that. When it comes to the planet, we've already spoken to a number of the things that are key to us, including a very small footprint on a mine.
Okay, now as the need for critical metals increases, and this has been a key theme at PDAC 2023, what kind of competitive advantage does the ability to produce a net zero emissions product give Ring of Fire Metals?
Well, again, an excellent question. You know, we look at the support that we as Ring of Fire Metals have with the province of Ontario and the leadership that the province of Ontario has shown about creating an environment to continue to grow the critical metals that Canada needs, both Ontario and Canada needs. So within that environment, there's a favorable energy, as I mentioned. That energy is very green in terms of its production. You know, Ontario is supporting a First Nations-led proponency for an environmental impact assessment on an infrastructure corridor that would lead up towards Eagle's Nest and also access the communities in those areas. That potential corridor represents an opportunity to have electricity supplied up to those communities, and as a byproduct, electricity available for the operation.
And that must be another huge advantage, the fact that the government's willing to put its hand in its pocket and help develop some of the infrastructure without which the mine wouldn't be possible. But, and should I say, that would save tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars off of your capex.
It certainly is. The one thing that's the benefit out of it is we see the provincial government partnering with First Nations. And I think that's a very unique part that's in here. You know, we're also actively looking to have the same level of engagement from the federal government. We have good access now at the bureaucratic level. We want to see the same level of engagement out of our federal government as well. The federal government has put out the critical mineral strategy, and now we want to see the same sort of engagement on how do we make these things happen. And I'm certain that we'll get that commitment from the feds as well.
Okay, let's hope so, because that a lot of people are telling me that's going to be one of the keys to unlocking critical minerals development in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere. Now, the group behind Ring of Fire Metals has also made large investments in other companies, such as in Greatland Gold, Hastings Technology Metals. What is driving these investments in terms of what is the overall strategy that your parent companies has regarding sort of critical metals?
I think to start off on the strategy bit, we have to back up a little bit and understand, there are 10 common values across our business that unite all aspects of the business. And each of those values is what guides us and drives us towards that. But there's a strong desire in part of the strategy to work towards a decarbonized future and to make investments into the metals and into the operations that are able to enable that, as well as to the energy sources that are in that. We can point to, if you've had a look in the family of companies, there's FFI with FMG, with Fortescue Metals Group. There's also Squadron Energy that's in there. two different aspects that are looking towards how do we develop alternative sources of energy and renewable sources of energy that have a decarbonized impact into our future.
Okay, thank you. Now, as we sort of draw to a close here, what will be some of the key highlights? What's the work program for the Eagle's Nest project this year? What are some of the key highlights we can expect to see coming out of Ring of Fire Metals?
So most recently in our news, you would have seen that we've signed MOUs with the two First Nations, Webquay and Martin Falls, that are immediately adjacent to us. Our first priority in work is to be able to work with our communities, but at the same time, we have some work to continue on some of the characterization and the planning for the future operations as we get forward. We'll really support the communities as their proponency for the infrastructure. And following that, once that gets kicked off and gets down the road, then we'll have an understanding of what our work plan looks like into the future to be able to plan the process for the development of Eagle's Nest.
Okay, I know this is going to be a forward-looking statement, but what sort of timeline do you think you have to be able to get towards that construction decision?
Today, it's a great question, and I get to ask that question often. I can say that I have more certainty, at least in a time range, now that we have the terms of reference together for the Northern Supply Link Road. And that was an announcement yesterday between the Ontario government and the First Nations of Webquay and Martin Falls. Now that gives us a time frame, at least, to have the environmental assessments kicked off, and during that process, we'll evaluate that. If I'm to ballpark and look at that, possibly in the latter years of the 2020s out into 2030 is when we're going to consider that period of time. But all of that is dependent upon the proponency and the permitting for the infrastructure that goes into it. So,
thank you. I think that really talks to the lead time it takes to get a project into production, and the fact that the government's now coming on board and hopefully putting things in place to shorten that timeline. Again, that must be very encouraging.
It is encouraging for us to see that unique partnership, in a newly created partnership between the provincial government and the First Nations, and we look forward to the future partnerships that come with others in that as well.
And I look forward to finding out more about Eagle's Nest as time progressed. Kristan Straub, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invite today, Paul.
I'm Paul Harris. Stay tuned to Kitco for more from PDAC 2023.
Kitco Mining's special coverage of PDAC is brought to you by Gold Mining and Uranium Energy Corps.